Hi, this is LeAura Alderson here with Best Boomers and Beyond, and also mytrainerfitness.com. And I'm mentioning that because while we're posting this originally on Best Boomers and Beyond, this is a topic that really fits also the concept of whole life fitness, because we're talking about financial fitness. And one of the people that I admire in the financial world is Patrick Donohoe of Paradigm Life. He's a very busy, highly successful entrepreneur who's been running Paradigm Life since 2007. So he survived the crash, not only that, but thrived, I think, during the crash. And his company has grown significantly. He's a family man, 3 children?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, 3 children, a beautiful wife, Cynthia, originally from Connecticut, living in Utah, and is into, do you still play hockey?
Yeah, the kids keep you busy enough where it is hard to get out, but I do tend to make it out at least once a month. So.
And how about CrossFit? Are you still doing CrossFit?
Yeah, CrossFit is my tension release.
Yeah.
Of the day. So yeah, I'm at CrossFit almost every day.
Awesome. I can tell because you certainly look very fit. Well, good for you on that.
Thank you.
So Patrick, tell me a little bit and tell us about, if you would start with, and by the way, just I want to mention, I appreciate you're, the head of a large company, and you rarely do these little intro kind of interviews now because your time is at such a premium. So we really appreciate you taking the time to share a little bit about yourself, your company, and the kind of financial resources that too few people know about. So speaking about that, I know your passion is financial education. Could you tell me how that got started, and how did it start for you and why?
Well, I guess it started in school right before I was finishing up my last 2 years of college. A friend of mine sent me a book recommendation, actually 2 book recommendations. The first one was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And the second one was The Millionaire Next Door. So I don't think The Millionaire Next Door was necessarily geared toward me at the time. It was the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book that really resonated with me because my parents were both teachers, and here, Kiyosaki was telling me that everything I was doing was wrong. Yeah. I was on the wrong path. So it was the first time anyone ever really given me that type of perspective on things. So it shook me up a little bit. But I still went to school, and but in school, one of the jobs that I had was I was a food service at a hotel here in town, and it's a really, really nice hotel. So I did room service, and that's where I started to learn, kind of how to sell. And because that's what Kiyosaki and Rich Dad Poor Dad really focused on, and I was able to build relationships with the patrons of the hotel, and learn how the tipping side of things work. I had never worked at anything like that before. Growing up, I worked at an ice rink, and never really had a job where I had to sell anything. So it was a really cool experience and very timely for reading that book. But then fast forward, I was only at the hotel for about a year. I got married, and found that regardless of how well of a salesman I thought I was, really, it wasn't paying the bills. So I found another a job at a call center here in town, and they did a lot of financial education, mainly around just budgeting programs. It was a nonprofit group. But there is, I was going to school. I got a degree in economics, and so a lot of the financial side of things lined up for me. And the sales side of things lined up for me as well. But one other thing clicked, which was, really what I'm really impressed with what you guys have built, which is how to do business on the internet, how to reach people remotely without being in a certain perimeter of your office or where you live, and that's what this one company did. So I was in this call center. I was talking to people in New York and Florida and Texas, and really all over the place. And it was an awesome. I didn't necessarily like the environment of a call center, but still just the nature of the business really resonated with me. So a lot of this stuff happened within kind of a 2-year period of time. So I graduated school, was studying for the GMAT. Was going to go to I speak another language, so I was going to go to international school in Phoenix. What's that?
What do you speak? What other language?
I speak Spanish.
Fantastic.
Yes, I speak Spanish. And my wife is originally from Mexico, so we still do teach our kids and speak to each other. So, but anyway, I really love the Latin culture, and I was going to get my MBA at Thunderbird in Phoenix. I was getting prepared to do that, but then there was another company that spun off of this call center that I was working with, and just decided to pursue that. And they did some other financial education and some investment stuff, just kind of the traditional way. So how Paradigm Life got started was with that specific company. I eventually became a partner, and discovered what I do today. And I discovered it from a woman whose name's Kim Butler. She was actually a Rich Dad advisor. She worked with Kiyosaki pretty closely in the beginning stages of his business, and had been practicing what I do today as a financial strategy for, I think at that time it was about 15 years. So she, proverbially took me under her wing, and I learned a lot of what she was doing. And I took doing business remotely and doing things on the internet. And I told my partners, I'm spinning off and I'm doing this. And that was about 2007. And 2008, 2009, this was the only thing that was working, and everything else did not work. So even though, you said in the beginning in the intro that I was thriving, I mean, in a sense I was, but obviously if you have something countering your thriving, I don't know if
that's right.
is thriving. So it was 2009, 2008, 2009 was pretty difficult. I actually broke away from the partners in 2009, and I've been on my own since. And we still do the same strategy. It focuses around whole life as how that relates to a person's personal financial plan. We don't really do much else. We are wealth strategists. A lot of us have securities licenses, and we give other type of financial advice. But mainly because of how we're able to do business online and through webinars and video conferences, we don't have to go after a finite amount of people and try to have them become our client and sell them all sorts of financial products, which is the case in traditional financial services. So we don't necessarily do that. We don't manage money. We don't do investments. But we solely focus on what role whole life will play, both in your accumulation plan, which is as you're working, as you're growing your wealth, and also in your income plan, which is what to do in retirement and how does a policy fit in there. It's not. We don't consider it the end all be all. It's not. It's a part, and it's a very vital part. And so a lot of the education that we give revolves around what part does it play. And honestly, the biggest part these days has just been dispelling a lot of the myths that are out there that have been perpetuated by all the financial gurus, which has become a challenge. I had no idea what type of stigma existed out there for whole life or for insurance before I got into the industry. I quickly discovered that it does exist. So we spend a lot of our time just providing content. We have a bunch of ebooks. We have a podcast that dates back to 2007. We do webinars every month. We put out just a lot of free information so that people can really discover for themselves what's true and what's not. We don't just say it's true because you should trust us. We say right. It's true because we can quantifiably prove that what everything has been, the things that are said about it are actually not entirely accurate. So anyway, I mean, just long story short, that's exactly what we're doing today. Business from a financial perspective doesn't really change much because it's the oldest industry in the country. It's not based on speculation. It's not based on interest rates per se, and the product, everything performs, everything works well. Just the nature of the business, obviously, with how quickly things are changing online, is what's keeping us on our toes. So
definitely. So you were talking about the challenge and the public's perception, and I would imagine that a large part of that would come from my generation, which is what the Best Boomers is about. Because basically, like you said, we've been miseducated or uninformed, and most of us don't. So here's the thing, and we're just now getting into this as well for this interview, and that is we are talking about the concept of using whole life insurance policies as a wealth building, wealth generating tool, right?
Yep.
And most people would never think about that. And one of the reasons I think insurance, perhaps in particular life insurance, gets a bad rap is not only, I mean, for a number of reasons, it's like, it's kind of an unpopular topic in general, right? We're talking about the end of life. We're talking about putting out money when people think they're never going to see it again. And, but what do I care? So you've got the kind of the uphill battle on education, but I think there's the whole other arena, and that is looking at and recognizing it as a financial tool for building wealth that people can use during their lifetime.
No, and those are great points. And again, it really does come down to what you mentioned, which is it's teaching the utilization. Because I agree. I mean, a lot of the things that are said about it aren't necessarily untrue. It's just typically when whole life is categorized, it's because of one specific benefit, which is a death benefit, and it's just not fair because that's like the least thing that we even focus on. The thing we focus on more is living benefits and how those apply to your existing investments, and also how they apply to the other sides of your financial world. So
right. And so a term that's used in the industry in general is infinite banking, right? You've got that on your website as well. So it's the concept that now. Do you remember back to when you were first introduced to the concept?
I do.
And so, I mean, because did it take you a little while to wrap your head around it too? And was it a real surprise and shock to you too, the concept that, wait a minute, you're telling me that this insurance policy is a wealth generating tool? Did it take a while?
Well, to be frank, the thing that intrigued me wasn't necessarily the name of it. It was what it did. And I, again, I didn't have a lot of exposure to the stigma and the stereotype that was out there about just insurance agents and advisors in general. Nonetheless, whole life. And so what was intriguing to me was how money, you could set up a policy so that money would build what's known as a cash value, which is essentially savings, and you earned interest, you earned dividends, but you could borrow against it. And that was a big thing for me, because I've been a real estate investor for 10 plus years, and I knew that real estate was one of those investments where you can have a lot of control and have a really good yield, both short term and long term. And so I didn't necessarily I didn't want to look at market investments or look at other investments that would grow my money. It was more I wanted to focus on actual assets that would produce over time. And so the whole life strategy wasn't a this or that asset. It was presented to me as kind of an and asset, which is, listen, we get it. You're in real estate, but you could use this to store your reserves, store your savings, and then when you needed to either purchase a new home or update a rental, you could borrow against the policy. It would still grow, it would still earn interest, you'd still earn dividends, but you can borrow against it and use it for your real estate. But I also had a family. And and that's kind of the strategy and the approach that we take, which is there's two sides of financial life. You have savings and you have purchase. And the saving side of things is you want to save for the long run, because you're not going to be able to work the same way you are for the rest of your life. And there's going to be a point in time where you have to kind of shift gears and live off of what you've accumulated. So the nature of savings is hopefully self-evident to most. But the thing people don't pay attention to is what we're taught to save into, like 401ks and IRAs and mutual funds. Okay, they're not meant to access. There's no liquidity there. It's meant for a future time, not right now. So then individuals, because they're saving and need to buy a car, go on vacation, there's braces, there's home repairs, there's whatever other expenses, families, I can list a million. We can spend all hour listing the expenses I have. But you can borrow against that policy instead of using credit cards, automobiles, and other type student loan debt, just debt in general. And honestly, going through 2008 and 2009, I saw clients that had just overextended themselves, and they had $100,000 in a 401k, but they were contemplating bankruptcy because they had $25,000 in credit card debt. Wow. So it's just weird that you have this kind of disconnect between financial life and individuals, because they're trying to do what they've been told and save into 401k, save into deferred compensation plans, to save into those arenas. When they need access to money, they can't access that. And so they go to their credit cards, they go to bank credit, and essentially there's strings attached there. And if things don't go as planned, typically those strings come knocking at the door if you don't live up to the standards, live up to the obligations of the debt. So essentially, as it was presented to me, I saw the savings component, I saw the financing component, and that's really where a lot of things started to click, because I had been doing, work in a call center and working, talking to people through webinars about financial education. I saw how much of a benefit that this would be, not just to me as kind of a, weird redheaded real estate investor, but for, essentially for the average family, where they could take, all or part of their savings and have some certainty and guarantee it would replace their bond portfolio or their cash or whatever side of their conservative portfolio. But then they wouldn't ever have to resort to credit cards or bank loans again. Because that was the hardest thing for me to really experience, is just seeing people and what banks did to them, whether it's judgments or collection agencies or harassment at their house. I mean, just banks go to, to the full extent to collect on you and make your life miserable if you do not live up to the terms that, that they've set. So obviously, just looking at going through that period of time, it just reinforced my my belief in what we do. And so setting up whole life a specific way. And this is not necessarily the latter stage of life, which I'll probably get to, which is for someone that has already built up their assets and is now living off of them. This doesn't relate to that person, but for the person that's building their wealth, building their assets, accumulating money. I mean, there's really no reason not to do this. And of course I say that because I'm biased, but I saw firsthand just hundreds and thousands of different cases where this would have helped had people had it in place. Right. But also saw that if the events of 2008, 2009 happen again, that people having this in place will help them, bridge the gap, if you will.
Right. So Patrick, did you keep and maintain some of the properties you had during the collapse?
I lost one. I lost one, which I bought in 2007.
Right.
Terrible time.
Yeah.
And I tried to hold on to it. Two things that happened. It dropped in value by a ton. I also had University of Utah football players living in it, and so yeah, I thought it was cool at the time. I was like, oh, this is really, but that's a long story. But no, the other ones I still have. All of them have come back. All of them cash flowed. The property I purchased in 2007 was not a cash flow play. It was a capital gains play. So I learned very quickly that you do have to have backup strategies. But then 2009, 2010, I got right back at it once things rebounded, and own quite a bit of property now.
So, and do you have any of them financed through the infinite banking concept?
Nothing outright. I do basically all the down payments with borrowing against policies. Okay. So when I go into a property, I mean, it's hard to pass up, 4% financing.
True. That's true.
On a 30-year loan, but they don't give you that financing on a rental property without money down. So essentially, borrowing against the policy, it gives you the ability to do kind of a 100% finance deal. And then instead of my strategy, and we have a whole website on just how to use this with real estate.
Yeah, and we'll link to that. Oh, is that still on your site? The real estate?
We have a site called beyourbank.com. Which has a whole kind of e-learning. It has a free e-learning platform on there where it kind of gives examples. But borrowing against, so you basically borrow against the policy to put as a down payment. And then as the property cash flows, you keep a couple months of reserves in a bank account. And then everything above and beyond that pays back the policy loan.
Okay. So now I know that there are some, people go and search the term of infinite banking and, life insurance and that sort of thing. You'll see a lot of critics out there. You'll see, a lot of misinformation. And I think a lot of it has to do with misinformation on which is the right and best tool. Is that right?
Yeah. And there's just a lot, there's a lot out there. And we try, and that's why we put a lot of information out there that hopefully people will gravitate toward it. But it's good. I mean, it's always good to have multiple opinions. It's always good to have multiple perspectives, because if you really just have one perspective on something, you're taking a gamble as to whether it's right or wrong for you. So it's good that there's a lot of critics, and I guess that's it's the stages that, truth goes through, where, it's not just accepted as truth. I mean, it goes through a rebuke and it goes through some criticism, and that's kind of where this is going through. And it's good that people have a forum online to ask questions and get answers. And everybody has opinions, and everybody has an ulterior motive or has a motive behind those opinions, and we do too. But it comes down to, if you address something rationally as opposed to it's bad because I say so.
Right.
Hopefully that carries weight with people, where if it's legitimately explained, it's clearly explained, and now it's not an opinion. There's some rational and empirical evidence behind it, and that hopefully will lead a person to make the right decision.
That sounds like a very wise and balanced answer. And one of the things I was going to ask you, so what would be tough questions that you would recommend people would ask someone? Like, first of all, we're going to post the links, of course, to your sites now, both Paradigm Life as well as beyourbank.com and your podcast. We're going to highly encourage people to peruse and totally vet all the resources you have already available for free, and educate themselves. And that's the bottom line. That's what it's all about. So along the lines of, and we're going to include some questions we think that people should ask, tough questions that they would ask their financial advisors, or anyone that they were considering and investing with. So if you were starting this out, or if you were seeing a client come in and they were asking you questions that were tough, uncomfortable, and yet you thought were a good idea, what would be an example of that?
So you're asking me if I were to come in, or a new client were to come in or let's say I was that client, what questions I would ask one of our strategists,
yes.
About what we do.
Yes.
No, that's fair. I think the first would be if we practice what we preach, if we actually do what we teach people, that would be the first thing. And I would have them prove it to you. Have them show you, black out whatever information, personal information, but show them that they actually do that. They do what they say they're going to do. One of the things that people bring up, which has become cliche, is buy term insurance and invest the difference of what it would cost to buy whole life. But yet, I've told a lot of clients that ask the person that actually says that and recommends it if they actually do it themselves and to prove it to you. Yeah. And I haven't had one instance yet. But it's one of those things where I think the world is full of rhetoric, and people will say whatever they want just to sell something. And so that's one of the requirements of all of our guys is they actually have to have policies. They have to be practicing this. And if they don't, then it's probably not the right fit for them. So that would be the first question. Second question is, I don't know. I mean, I would ask them how they've used it. If an infinite banking side of things, how have they used it to purchase their vehicles or get out of debt or buy a piece of property. Other things are, I would ask them for another opinion, a second opinion. Okay, you get to the point where they prepare a plan for you. They look at your financial situation and say, this is what I feel the best fit is. And then say, maybe what is the guy next to you? If you were to give this to him, what would he do? Would it look the same? That'd be another question. We've had lots of hard questions of how much do you another stigma that's out there is that guys that sell whole life make a lot of money. And I think it could be set up, policies can be set up to make a lot of money. But that really, it prevents the cash buildup, the cash value buildup that we emphasize in the majority of our cases. And so you can ask them, what is the commission structure and how does that work? What other hard questions? My thing, it's hard for me to, those are
objections.
Those are really good questions. I like your questions a lot. One thing that when clients ask me, what am I missing? What questions should I ask? My big thing is the commitment. Because typically these days we're a very short-term society. We make a decision. We get, we're in January right now. So how many decisions do people say, okay, I'm changing this, I'm changing this, I'm changing this, I'm changing this. And then, fast forward 2 months later, what really changed? To make significant changes, it's not a singular decision. It's a series of decisions. And committing to setting up, our program and incorporating that into your financial life, it requires that you're committed. You're committed for the rest of your life. And so I often say that. I say, listen, this is not something you just cancel tomorrow or next year or the year after that. This is something that you're committing to for forever. So that's another, that's another thing too, as individuals come and work with us. that we make sure we communicate. Because if you look at a lot of the education that we have online, I didn't necessarily conceptualize that for new people. I really did it for existing clients, so that, if they did have questions, they did have concerns, they have a place to go to refresh their memory and to be re-educated. Because I saw in the first couple of years, it's, people would get really excited in the beginning and they would love it. Then they would go to a cocktail party and tell, their friends about it, and their friends flipped out on them and asked them questions they could not answer. And then they backpedaled and came back to me and was, what is this and this and this and this?
Yeah.
All of which were able to be answered. But at the same time, learning something new and something unorthodox or against the grain, you do need to, have the ability to defend it or justify your decision in a sense. Because it's definitely going to be scrutinized at some point.
Definitely. Well, and on your website, your slogan is "Join the thousands who have overcome antiquated ideas about money." So that's the other part is, we're in revolutionary transitional times where all our old systems no longer work, and yet we've been hanging on to them for too long. As Robert Kiyosaki says, we live in a debt-based society, and it's a matter of learning how to leverage debt and make debt work for us.
Yep.
The way the wealthy predecessors have, like the bankers, and that's how they've basically made money. So it's learning in a way how to be our own banker, which really ties back in with infinite banking, and learning how to work within the new rules. And that requires education. So we'll be definitely tying that information in with our article. So a couple questions relative to that. Relative to some of the tough questions as well, as that would be, about ages of people. So, do you have a policy on each of your children, for instance?
Well, it depends. It depends on the scenario of the family or the person. Sometimes that makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't. Oftentimes it's just one of those things that people think is true, which is in reality not. But people think that there's a lower cost of insurance for children than there is for adults, and that's not the case. Because even though kids are younger, they have a lot longer life to live. If you analyze the two policies and what happens at 50 years after each policies, they're almost identical. Because if you think about it, let's take a 60-year-old and a 30-year-old. Okay, a 60-year-old or even a newborn. You could buy policies. 2 weeks after my son was born this last year. We set up a policy on him, so you can set them up right after they're born. But if you analyze that 0-year-old, okay, and you analyze a 60-year-old, okay, 30 years after the 0-year-old, he's going to be 30 years old. His cash value is going to be X. The 60-year-old is going to be 90 years old and most likely going to be gone, passed away. So the death benefit is almost going to be the equivalent of whatever the cash value is of that 0-year-old. So again, it's one of those things where we teach, but that's a stereotype often people have in relation to cost of insurance. But it does depend on the purpose of why you're doing what you're doing. Because if a person came to me and said, I want to buy a policy, but I'm too old, I'm 60 years old, I want to do it on my grandchild or my son or my daughter, then again, it's just misinformation. They're making that assumption based on incorrect information. So we typically will look at that scenario and figure out what objectives are. Our objectives, you need more retirement income. You want to delegate the policy to what you pass on to your kids. You're going to work 10 more, because a lot of 6-year-olds want to work until they're mid 70s now. So it could be a policy meant for accumulation. So it really, and that's why, we do our webinars. We don't meet with anybody in our office. All of our consultations are done through webinars. And so we personalize them because we're trained. We look at, a person's finances and figure out the best way that it applies to their situation. And oftentimes people don't know how it applies to them. That's why good questions and figuring out, needs and areas that are maybe of concern and how to figure out a way to solve those problems.
Right. So that makes so much sense, really. And it's really good to hear too, that a couple of things. One is that these can be tailored to each individual need, and it may not fit every individual's need. So it's not the be all end all for everyone, which of course makes sense. So Patrick, you are, actually, when were you born?
78.
Okay. So your parents are boomers.
Mhm.
right? Okay. So you have children, you're in the middle, and your parents are boomers, which fits
Yep.
the scenario of many of our audience they may be boomers, and they have seniors who are their parents, and then they have younger people who are generation, millennial generation XYZ.
Yep.
So what would you recommend for your parents? And this gets into now the boomer audience. And actually, I'm looking at this from several angles. One is for the boomers, what would benefit them, as
Mhm.
well as what they would tell their children and their grandchildren. So I know that that's a big, broad spectrum, and we could maybe start with boomers, wherever you think would be most
Yeah.
helpful.
And it's actually, this isn't, because the question was, what would I tell them? This is what I've told them, and this is, and a lot of the stuff they're doing. But my parents, they're right at my dad was born in '46, so he's right at the beginning of that generation. And so with my parents, they were both teachers. They were fortunate enough to have a pension. But I think we meet with a lot of our average client is over 50 years old. So we do work a lot with those that are not necessarily focused on accumulating more money, but figuring out how to take that wealth and that accumulation and turn it into income. And that's a very difficult thing to understand, because if you look at our financial services world right now, it's managing $25 trillion of retirement assets. And those retirement assets, the purpose was to build them to a point where they can be taken as income. Okay, but what started to happen is your mutual fund managers, your money managers, Wall Street, because that's where all their money comes from, is the fees associated with that money under management. It's just a huge industry out there. They don't want you to take that money and put it into something that's going to generate more income. They want you to keep your money there. And so there's a lot of strategy right now that revolves around a concept called the Monte Carlo simulation that basically tells baby boomers that are in retirement that you cannot take more than 4% of your portfolio per year if you do not want to run out of money throughout the rest of your life. So think about it. Someone with $1 million in their portfolio can't take more than $40,000 a year. So it doesn't make much sense at all.
Yeah.
But that's again what's being pushed to this generation, that they've done a good job of saving and they've trusted these financial people to grow their assets over time. Now they're at the point that they want to live off of them, but because their life expectancies are into the middle 80s, upper 80s, okay, they can't take out large sums of money because of market volatility. Okay, if they start taking out money and there's a loss in the market, you have a double loss, right? So if the market drops 10%, you take out 10%. Now for you to rebound to what the market lost, there's a 20% gap there now. So again, and there's a couple of videos in our ebook talks a lot about this specific strategy, the best ways, because there's not one specific way. The best way is to turn assets into income. But a lot of is out there right now with what financial services is promoting is to take a very small amount of your portfolio per year. They kind of put that out there as kind of a stick. If you take more, you're jeopardizing running out of money. And running out of money is from the surveys and that I've seen is the number one fear of the baby boomer generation. That's why they're working longer. You have side jobs. It's running out of money. And I don't think that fear should exist, because there are proven, and these aren't new strategies. These are strategies that a lot of executives use. You look at the portfolios of most politicians; they have insurance products and annuity products to set themselves up for what we teach,
Right?
Which is a guaranteed income for life. So I don't have to worry about not being able to, or not, worry about not outliving their money.
Sure, and that makes so much sense. And I would imagine that one of the big factors that affect that picture is the fact that the interest rates are so low. So that's the other. These are investment tools, and so it's not just the pension plans and what have you. But when interest rates are low and good for all of us in some ways, it also then affects somebody else someplace else.
It's interest rates, because obviously you have portfolio recommendations that weigh heavily on bond rates, and obviously bond rates right now are in the toilet, and so you're right. The portfolio weights more on interest rates now than it does on securities and or equity. So it's an interesting dynamic. But another thing too is just it's the fear of market volatility, because you have 80% of that $25 trillion that I was talking about is in the hands of baby boomers. So another fear is that if too many people are withdrawing at once, what does that do to a correction in the stock market? You have more selling of securities, selling of bonds than you do purchasing. And that right there is just simple supply and demand. That if you have more demand than, or more supply than demand, you have a drop in prices. That's what could essentially occur if a lot of baby boomers hit a specific age where they're all taking money out and stopping their contributions.
Right.
It's another big thing. And Kiyosaki, and I know you follow a lot of the Rich Dad crew, but he talks a lot about that, and it's been discussed in many other books as well, as just a potential large market correction just because of how weighted the market is with baby boomer money.
Yeah, and it's scary, and yet at the same time, what it's forcing so many people to do is really, in the end, a very good thing, and that is to become better informed. It's sort of like
Exactly.
I liken it to the from the fitness side, the obesity epidemic and health care and health in general and that sort of thing. And we can go to the doctors, but doctors are not trained in preventive medicine. So basically they do not tell us how to eat better and to exercise and that sort of thing so much. We learn to do that ourselves. And so most of us know that, the kind of nutritious food we should be eating more and that we should be exercising more. We know how to do that for our bodies, but we don't yet know how to do that for our money. And so that
honestly, and most people don't associate what you're talking about. They consider them kind of different parts of their life. But if you look at just kind of studies around what goes on in your mind and how that affects your body, when you're afraid of something, then it paralyzes your body. It doesn't allow it to do what it can do. And that's a lot of the sentiments that we hear from the stories that are out there of those that are trying to figure out what to do and are just afraid of if they continue on the same course, what's going to be the result.
Yeah, absolutely. And the quickest way out of fear are two things. One is education and movement. So it's like basically, moving ourselves forward through education. And in this matter, I think is a big thing. Before, I know that you're going to hopefully do a little screen share and show a little diagram. But before we go there, let me just ask you, Patrick, if this is another one of those tough but fair questions. And that is, what are the financial vehicles you use for investing your funds and managing your funds?
My personal money?
Yes.
Right now, I mean, I own Paradigm Life. I'm the only owner. And so I invest a lot of money in the company. That's a big investment, but I do a lot of other stuff as well. There's an investment group that I'm a part of, and we purchased 15 properties, and then we participate in different syndications, which are just kind of pooled investments, but it's all in typically multifamily real estate. So I've done a multifamily, pretty large sum in Arizona, one in Texas, and then one in South Florida. And then the properties that we own are mainly in Texas and Utah. And then I own about a half a dozen properties by myself. But I just started. I actually interviewed the president on our podcast last week. But I've become very curious about crowdfunding, and so there's a crowdfunding real estate company called Fundrise, and they're out of Washington D.C. Their family has been in real estate development, and they have just really cool projects. You can go in there and you can essentially, you pool your money with a lot of other investors, and there's a whole platform that you can ask questions and debate, and all the documents are there. You basically transact online for these different syndications. Right now, they're raising money for the Third World Trade Center. They're a part of that syndication. So so that's something I've done recently. I've done some lending club stuff as well.
So when you
I have go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, to clarify, when you say you interviewed the president of
Fundrise.
Okay.
Yeah, not President Obama. I don't know if I would, maybe next month. I did say Washington D.C., so I know. I know.
To make sure. So what were you going to say before I jumped in?
I have a lot of gold and silver that I've purchased over the years. I started doing that even before I started Paradigm Life.
So basically, I would hazard a guess that you're very familiar, of course, with the cash flow game and the cash flow principles as put up by Robert Kiyosaki, and the concept that you're independently wealthy, truly independently wealthy, when it is that your passive income exceeds your expenses.
Yep.
And with all that you have going on, I find it hard to believe that you wouldn't already be there, basically. So if that's the case, what drives you to keep doing all this, to doing so much more?
Yeah, and my wife and I, Cynthia and I, we came to the point during 2009, 2010 where we kind of disciplined ourselves to stay at a specific expense level, and we've lived in the same home for 10 years. I put half of my earnings into insurance because everything that I invest in outside of insurance is done so with policy loans. So I invest a lot in the company through a loan. I invest in real estate through that loan. And it's just a great way for me to track. And my bookkeeper, it took him a while to understand what I wanted to do, but to track the return on investment. That's another big thing for real estate is most people invest in real estate. They have a cash flow and it's like, oh, I have a return. And it's like, no, you don't have a return because you put $50,000 into it. Have you received your $50,000 back in cash flow? And that's not the case. Of course, you have equity, and you can argue that. But basically, what I do is I measure injections into the company. I measure injections into all investments, and they're not investments. It's not a return on investment until that policy loan has been paid back. So it's a great way to kind of keep me disciplined. But yeah, I mean, it's I've been fortunate. So what drives me, it's a couple of things. The first thing is, there's over 50 people that work here. And, it's not to say that I'm working for somebody else, but providing employment and being able to create a culture here is really something that I'm passionate about. All of the strategists that work here are all either friends, past clients, or family members of not just me, but of one another. We've never recruited outside of that, outside of that. And we have some guys on the outside that work remotely as well. But it's the culture that also keeps me engaged and keeps me passionate. But it's also the challenge, and I think that's probably the one driver. Is even last week we put something on Facebook, and we had all these Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman and Primerica people slamming us, and it's just
wow.
It's just that challenge where. I just want people to, to think, to don't rely on stereotypes. Don't rely on, what somebody else says. When you make a decision based on your knowledge, not somebody else's. Not to say that somebody else's knowledge is incorrect. But it's not yours. And essentially, there's a risk associated with that because, that all people are fallible. And so my passion is just, it is the education side of things. It's naturally to. I'm competitive by nature. I grew up playing hockey. I have two younger brothers. We're all within a year of each other. So it was like, we drove it was an awesome, I love my brothers, but again, I had a lot of variables, a part of my life that made me naturally competitive, and seeing my competition, which is the traditional way of doing things, which is how 99% of people do things. It's obviously a very big challenge. And despite the financial remuneration, it's still, I want to be that voice out there that questions the status quo and breaks a lot of the paradigms, the paradigms of the world, because I think paradigms are destructive because they can lead you into areas of life and decisions that are not the best for you. And I've seen it. Doing business online, it's awesome because people can tell you to, screw you. I'm not doing business with you. You can have very authentic, good conversations through webinars that you can't have one-on-one. And I think a lot of these days, people are going to the internet to get their financial advice because they don't want to go into somebody's office, because once you have that personal, physical interaction, there's this obligation to do something with them. Just because you've built some sort of rapport or relationship. That doesn't exist necessarily online. People can be more authentic. They can ask hard questions. And I think that will lead them to make the best decisions for them and their family. Definitely.
I agree with that. Did you have anything that you think would be helpful to introduce people to the concept that you'd like to screen share about, or shall we just link to videos? What do you think would best serve informationally?
there's a couple of videos that we can post as links. That might be the best way
Okay.
to basically show and have a visualization of what we talked about today.
Okay,
So
good.
I can give you two.
Okay, sure. We'll maybe you can shoot those to me an email, and we'll put those in the link with the intro article that we're doing. And so, since we have a little bit of extra time, could I, as far as not needing to shift to screen share, you mentioned that what you really love to do is that you're passionate about teaching and educating, and changing sort of the status quo. And you're doing that primarily through financial education, or do you have any other, like, what is your dream?
What is my dream? My dream is to raise good kids. Honestly,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my, having, because we have an 8-year old and a 10-year-old, two girls. I grew up with all boys. And so what rocked my world, was having daughter. We're getting married and then having daughters. And, and I think the 2009, 2010 was, it was really difficult for me. Just because I was working 12 hours a day, I was really unhealthy. And coincidentally, that's when I discovered CrossFit as well. Just raising my family, having my girls, and now having a newborn. Well, he'll be 9 months next week. That's my dream, is just to provide, for them. It destroyed me to be on, because it was, with me, it's like I live in a little tiny apartment and eat ramen, but having a family, having obligation there, it was heartbreaking for me in 2009, 2010. Just being on the brink of, not being able to provide for my family. And it was hard. And so I think my dream is to help the people that are here, provide those that work for Paradigm Life and are associated with it to have a living. It's also to not have my family be put in that situation again, but be in the position where I'm able to teach my children, inspire my children, and leave a legacy. And that's honestly, a lot of that philosophy, a lot of that culture we build into our education, because all we do, a lot of our strategy is to help people, and it helps people build who they are. It helps them build certainty. It helps them build their legacy. Because at the end of the day, you can have all the money in the world, but you can have a crappy life.
Yeah.
Because what's most important is not the financial side of things. It's such a vital part. But it's not what should be driving things. So yeah, I think if you were to ask me what my dream is, it's to be a good father to my children and to my wife.
So what kind of education would you design for your daughters, for and your son, your children? Now your girls are already in school, right?
Yeah, so they're in school, and so we have these kind of like. So we come to my office a couple Sundays a month, and we just do kind of I just teach them random things. I'll teach them about money side of things. I'll teach them about relationships, teach them about their friends, teach them about sports. Right now, 8 and 10 years old girls, it's one of those things where I don't know, the stuff they bring home is eye opening.
Yeah.
And so the thing that Cynthia and I try to really instill is we don't want them to hide anything from us. That's the big thing. Or don't feel embarrassed to talk to us about things. I just think, I read a book during this kind of 2009, 2010, which is called Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. And it talked about the relationship a daughter has with any man going forward will all be associated with you. And the pediatrician that wrote the book, she didn't pull punches. She used the worst possible scenarios, and it talked about how strong the relationship is between a parent and a child. And so that's, a lot of what I try to teach them is to be open in that regard. We play, other things. We play Cashflow. We play Cashflow all the time. A lot of things I'd love to do with them on kind of daddy-daughter dates is to question them, to figure out why they think something is a certain way, and they don't like that.
Yeah.
They don't like that. They don't like that very much. Because I took my youngest to dinner about a month ago, and I kept asking questions until she gave me a good answer, which she ended up saying I don't know, which was why are you in school? Like, why do you want to learn? Why do you want why? And but it was cool because it puts, I don't know, I just think I look at not to say that my parents were my great parents, but there's just there's a lot that I see that I can teach my children based on what I've done that will give them a step up and allow them to influence others.
Well, absolutely. And the thing is that each generation, hopefully this is the way it should go, expands their knowledge of what they can share based on what they know and what they've done already. Yep. So, in your case, your parents did the best they could do based on what they knew. And now you're expanding that and passing that along.
Well, I think this is the millennial generation, even my kids' generation, it is the most exciting generation that the world's ever had. Yeah. And I know a lot of people have a lot of fear about the state of our economy, the state of our political situation, the state of our foreign affairs. I mean, there's a lot to be concerned with. There always has been. You go back through history, it's always been this way, and we always figure out a way to get out of it.
Yes.
And looking at our children and the millennial generation, I know a lot of people don't have faith in them that much because they just play Xbox and sit at home text all the time and don't have any social skills. And that's another stereotype. Yeah. I don't think that's true, but it's very similar to how baby boomers were perceived. How were baby boomers perceived? They were perceived as these hippies that smoked weed and danced around to weird music. That's how they were perceived. But look at what.
Hang on, Patrick.
Same stereotype is going to our children, which is, oh man, they're on technology and they have no social skills.
Yeah.
They're going to discover some of the most amazing things, the cures to diseases, cures to social stigma. I mean, even look at just the crowdfunding thing that I mentioned. Banks are becoming impossible to deal with. People figure out a way around it, and it's just going to continue that way. So I just think it's a really cool time to live, and it's based on what you your perspective, and that determines reality. And I think it's just a cool, really, even though it's crazy and chaotic, it's one of the coolest times to be alive.
I agree. It's totally amazing. And one of the things that makes it that way for me are people like you. I have met and seen and observed so many 30-somethings these days that are doing amazing work and seem to have an innate wisdom that, they have a sense and perspective and almost a quick grasp of thinking out of the box and destroying the box and creating something new. So I see so much of that and so many people doing amazing things with a real vision. I see also so many of the millennials and people in your generation. So are you generation Y? X generation?
Yeah, I'm like the end of X, yeah.
Okay, so the end of it. So generation X, etc. They're coming back to family. They're coming back to one parent in the home whenever possible. They're coming back to the father being more involved, and the internet's making that possible. So I'm very inspired, like you, that if we don't go into it with fear and we just recognize this is another transitional time. So in keeping with that, and to kind of bring the interview to a close, I know you need to move on, is what could you advise and what would you advise, what have you advised your parents and people like them, the baby boomer generation who might have fear or might be wondering, what they should do with their resources that they see more limited than it should have been or than they thought it was going to be?
Yeah, that's great. That's an awesome question. I think it's what I've advised my parents is they need to have good communication with us. I think that is one of the biggest, us, I mean my brothers and I. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've seen is that baby boomers want to kind of put up some sort of wall because they don't, they trust their kids, they don't trust their kids. And I think communication between the two generations is paramount. I think that's the first thing. And then talking through that fear, why the fear exists and ways in which that fear can be extinguished. That's the other direction. Fear is not a permanent state. Fear, there's all sorts of acronyms for it, but false evidence appearing real, that's what comes to mind. It's not true. Something you're afraid of is not true because there could be a solution out there. You basically saying that I'm in a permanent fear situation says that I know everything, therefore I'm going to be here the rest of my life. That's not true. I think sharing, collaborating, the internet is awesome these days because chances are, and this is what I do in business, chances are I face a problem in business. I don't say, nobody else has faced this problem, so I guess I have to go figure out a solution. I find somebody else that's faced the same problem, and guess where I turn. So I have a couple of business coaches, but a lot of times I turn to the internet, and I think now sites such as yours and just the resources out there, a lot of people have this same mentality, and they are also trying to figure out what to do. Yeah. It's always been more effective to hunt in a pack as opposed to by yourself.
Yes.
And nowadays I think that is so much, it's so possible. And a lot of, a lot of the solutions, they may not exist or they may have different forms. But believe me, entrepreneurs have existed since humans were able to think.
Yeah.
And believe me, entrepreneurs are figuring out ways to solve your problems. And I would just, have a attention toward the internet, communicate, don't go about it on your own.
I agree totally. And our kind of motto is defining and creating, inventing your best life here and now. And that means recognizing that now, the second half of life, we have the most resources to do more with than ever at any time in history, as you indicated, and we can participate. We don't have to be bystanders.
Nope, don't sit on the sidelines.
Well, Patrick,
it never works.
Never worked. No, at some point you have to get in the game,
You do.
But this has been amazing. You're awesome, and I really appreciate you taking the time. We will definitely post this interview with all your links, because I'm sure people will be very interested in information you have available for free on your website and your podcast. I can't believe it, you've been doing podcasts since 2007. I mean, practically before they were invented, you've been doing podcasts.
I know, it's great. It's great. Yeah, you should have seen my setup. I had all sorts of like clunky stuff everywhere. Now it's like I have a microphone and a computer. And it's a little bit easier today to do it than it was back then.
A lot easier. Okay, well, take care and say hello to Cynthia. And thanks again so much. And we'll be in touch soon.
Okay, sounds good. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.